Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 20, and this will be the day. Hey boss, long time no see. Wolf gave a small grumble of displeasure as he rubbed his nose, making sure nothing was broken and no blood. He sat against his desk and continued rubbing the ache from his nose before his eyes panned around and looked at everyone that had broken in. He sighed. Yes, sometime actually. Didn't think I would be seeing you again. Naruto sarcastically jabbed. What, did you miss us or something? Nothing of that sort. His rebuttal was immediate as he stared at the teen. I was just under the impression that you had been caught and were being detained somewhere far away. Or maybe you were captured by someone you tried to steal from and were being tortured. Or you were just dead. Tenten felt a weird chill fill her stomach with the way he said that. Well, those are some disturbing thoughts to be having in your downtime. Wilkes lowered his hand from his face and looked at the white-haired girl standing behind Naruto. I was wondering how you were making all these assumptions of data you shouldn't have been able to get, but now I know, and I must say, I'm surprised of this little ensemble you gathered here today. An heiress, two of my former little lackeys, the strongest of the new generation, and the bathroom attendant. John felt some looks land on him questioningly, and he hung his shoulders. It's a long story. Weiss felt a confident smile come over her while looking around at the others. I didn't think you would actually make it, and with perfect timing, I'm impressed. Naruto spared her a look. We found an effective way to track you. Well, that's fortunate and everything, but we have some concerns we need to fix. And that deal we caught him having in the parking lot wasn't what we thought it was. It won't be able to help. We need to find another way too. Weiss' voice spoke when she realized that Naruto's eyes were no longer focused on hers. As a matter of fact, no one was looking directly at her. They were looking at her, the lower part, her body, her clothes. Hey! Weiss yelled, getting everyone to stop staring at the outfit she was wearing and focus back on her. Naruto blinked his eyes for clarity. Sorry, what was that? Why are you all looking at this stupid outfit? Weiss inquired pointedly while looking around and covering herself with the jacket. You understand how dire the situation we are in is, correct? Sorry, Weiss, it's just... Pyrrha gave a nervous smile. Your dress seems to drag in the ice. Weiss's eye twitched, and she looked back at the boys, seeing some of them turn their eyes at the last second to not get caught. She grumbled, Does someone, anyone, have my clothes? Oh, right here. Ruby collapsed Crescent Rose back into its standby form and grabbed the duffel bag around her shoulder. She leaned on the top of the couch and tilted it over, and falling into a roll and bouncing to her feet right next to her partner. She started pulling her clothes out of the medium-sized bag. Here, Weiss, I picked up some stuff for you. Your clothes. She pulled out some crystals, some more dust if you need it, and she even pulled out the girl's sword, which was bigger than the bag had contained it in. And Martinaster. The hare snatched the bag out of her hand and looked through it in shock. How did you get all my stuff together so easily? Wait, how did you get in my locker? Ruby looked aside nervously. I saw you typing your locker combination and memorized it. I thought it would come in handy if you ever needed your weapon and couldn't get it yourself. And I was right. You. I seemed to be fuming and wanting to point out so many things wrong with Ruby's action, but sighed and held the bag tightly. I'll reprimand you later, right now. Thank you. Weiss then looked around the room for an appropriate place to change from prying eyes. Wolf pointed by the bar. Down the hall bathroom is the first door to the right. Thanks. Weiss disappeared in a dash of white to change out of her horrible clothing. After the white-haired girl vanished from sight, Blake looked over at their leader with a questioning gaze. Why did you memorize her code? I told you, in case I need to grab her weapon. I know your combination too, and Yang's. She motioned to her friends. I know everyone's combination. Whoa, what? Kiba expressed all of their surprises as he looked at the short girl. How'd you memorize all of our combinations? Let's not talk about who followed you guys around with a pen and paper and watched you crunch the numbers. She pulled out her weapon and extended it into sniper mode. Let's get back to locking this guy down. Good call. The students all focused back on the criminal mastermind at the end of their barrels as he gave a small chuckle. I must admit, I am quite surprised to be seeing you two here again. Naruto, Sasuke. And you brought so many of your friends with you today. He clapped once before nodding. I don't think you two were capable of making friends, but I was wrong. Here you are, along with your teenage thieving ninja brats, breaking into my building and threatening me with weapons. I don't know whether to be frightened or proud. Sasuke tightened the grip on his sword and threatened, Stop talking. But really, I was considering having to send out a few men to search the kingdom to find you boys, bring you back. or otherwise, but here you are, come knocking down the glass and right back home. He feigned joy at seeing the two boys again before tilting his head. I have to know, why the sudden visit? Did you leave something and come to pick it up? The others didn't appreciate the way he spoke so casually and diminished the severity of the situation like this, but Naruto knew he was just trying to mess with their heads. He scoffed and smirked. We looked at the TV and saw your ugly mug on the screen, and I gagged so much I wanted to come kick your ass, and as it turned out, all these guys had the same idea. Wolf gave a small nod before looking around at the other presents. You know, it was rather reckless of you all to barge in here like this. I may be forced to call the local authorities and have you apprehended. Imagine the shame you would bring to yourself and your families. Being caught like these two degenerates. Blake shook her head. Like you would ever call the police. Wolf gave a small shrug in return. I suppose you are right. He shook his head. But it's really such a shame. 12 young souls vanished from the world without a trace or anyone knowing why. It is going to be such a sad story when it comes on the news. You're going down today? Yes. Well, we will see about that. Okay, that's it. Yanked her arms down and cocked her gauntlets before stomping past Naruto and towards the smug prick that had been pissing her off. Can we just knock this guy out first or something? We can search through this place for the stuff he stole afterwards, but I'm gonna shut this guy up now. Pure tried to convince her otherwise, while the others all had mixed looks at the idea. Yang, wait, we might need him to bang. Yang punched him square in the stomach, unleashing an explosive blast from the shells that impacted and a smoke cloud in return. And when the cloud spread, it revealed Wilk standing completely unharmed. Yang blinked in surprise. The others did too. Everyone was surprised that the large man didn't fall after being hit. Yang reeled her fist back and struck him in the gut again, causing another burst of fire at the same effect. The girl grit her teeth and started releasing a quick barrage of fists into his stomach and chest to try and topple the large man, but after she was finished, she stepped back and saw she had done nothing to affect him. In fact, all he did was wipe his suit and fix the edge before a small smirk appeared on his face. Yang looked back with jaw-hanging confusion, seeing the others with similar looks after what they had seen. She shook her head. What the hell was that? A good effort, Wilk stated before he pulled back and smacked her across the head, sending her flying into the bar and shattering most of the drinks there before she fell behind the counter. Ruby cried out, Yang! Shoot him! Everyone aimed their weapons at the rich man and started firing their rounds in rapid fire. Bullets and arrows flew across the room as Wilkes raised his arms in front of his head and blocked. The onslaught of bullets collided against his arms and body, and after a few seconds the student stopped firing and just stared at the phenomenon in shock. Wilk lowered his arms, dislodging some of the rounds that collided against him while leaving the rounds along his body untouched. He gently grabbed the ends of his suit and pulled it down with a quick flick, bouncing the bullets and arrows off of him as they cluttered the ground. He dusted off his jacket to make sure it was perfect before smiling and nodding at the student's efforts. He noticed one of Naruto's arrows had bounced on top of his desk and picked it up. So, what's the second part of this plan? Weiss came running out, still trying to secure her hair in its side ponytail fashion. After she had finished getting dressed, she looked around. I heard a lot of firing. What happened? The others just responded by wordlessly pointing at the man that fiddled with the arrow in his hand and the plethora of rounds surrounding his feet. Weiss nodded. Well, of course. His suit is woven with dust. It's most likely bulletproof. They all just stared at the Harris accusingly as she reeled back. What? My father wears suits just like it when he goes overseas for business. Did you all not realize it was made out of wood dust? The piercing looks were all she needed to know the answer. Wilkes turned the arrow around in his hand. Yes, I never go out of my way to tell my subordinates what I use to fight or defend myself. You never know when they might decide to come pay me a visit like this. I so do enjoy the looks of horror when they realize what they've gotten themselves into. He pulled back and threw the small arrow at the center of the group, startling everyone at how quickly it came flying through the air. They moved out of the way and watched as the tiny projectile bounced off of the ground so forcefully that it shattered the marble it hit. It kept bouncing before making a trench in the stone and coming to a complete halt. Everyone looked back over to Weiss to see she was just as shocked as they were. She looked at them and shook her head. I have no idea. Wilkes turned around and turned the pad on his desk around for an easier access, releasing a mechanical click as they faced towards him. A red light started to shine on and off as a silent alarm went off on all floors and alerted the guards to their presence. He pressed his hands against the desk again as they read his fingerprints and made an approving click. A panel by his feet started to open up and raise a long sword handle and blade with a large revolver of dust at the base of its hilt. He pulled the massive lever out, grabbing it with two hands before warning the students. I've been surviving attempts on my life for decades now, boys and girls, and all those times I've learned never leave myself unprotected. Urgh! Naruto was the first to charge forward as he fired arrows from both blades as a first strike. Wilkes had to block the arrows with his blade as Naruto came running towards him and spun through the air for extra speed. He released a barrage of rapid slashes and cuts that clashed in a flurry of sparks against the large sword. Naruto landed and dropped directly to his knees as he struck Wilkes' legs, but to no avail as each slash created a subtle ring and flash of silver from the suit. Wilkes barely even buckled as he brought his sword up and slammed it down on the space Naruto was crouched, but the whiskered blonde rolled out of the way as the blade splintered the floor from its heavy weight. Wilkes didn't seem affected by his miss as he pulled the trigger, and his whole sword glowed red for a moment. He gripped it tightly, and with a loud yell, he swung it in the direction Naruto dodged, creating a massive explosion that rocketed Naruto backwards and across the room with enough power to crack the wall he slammed against. Ruby furrowed her eyes before she aimed her scythe back and pulled the bolt on her weapon, firing and sending her flying at Wilkes. Kiba and Ren followed after her and jumped up to catch the man off guard, while Ruby started unleashing a flurry of quick and precise strikes with her massive weapon. Wilkes blocked the first few strikes, but was overwhelmed by the younger girl's speed as she managed to land a few hits, but to no avail as the dust-woven suit continued to take the damage without fault. He finally managed to catch the blade of the scythe with his large sword and knocked the little girl away for a moment before the two boys landed and started unleashing a barrage of their own in retaliation. Kiba ran in and rapidly punched Wilkes in the stomach before leaping up as Ren came running in and slashed him. Ruby managed to fix her position as she dashed forward and joined the two others in their onslaught of attacks, the sound of metal and gunfire echoing out as Wilkes was using the least amount of wasted movement to block what he could of the three-man attacks. He pulled another trigger under his hand, and the revolver turned to the yellow cartridge before pulling the same trigger he used to ignite his blade. The massive sword glowed yellow before unleashing several bolts of lightning that went in every direction, striking Ren and Ruby in their shoulders as a bolt stabbed Kiba through his guard. The three went tumbling back before lightning started striking across the whole room as if a thunderstorm was contained inside. "John, Nora, Tenten, get down!" Pure yelled as she turned and tackled her friends to the ground, barely avoiding the massive surge of electricity that blasted right where they stood. They had to duck further down to avoid any damage they may receive from the sporadic strikes. Blake and Sasuke were left to use their agility to closely dodge the bolts that threatened to hit them. Blake was about to land, but a bolt of lightning struck exactly where she was approaching, causing her to curl up and land in a crouch. She didn't have a moment to spare as the second bolt was coming directly at her. She prepared to guard, but didn't have to, as an inevitable barrier repelled the lightning and protected all of them from harm. Blake looked up and saw Weiss was holding Mertenaster forward as the glyph rotated beneath her feet and glowed brightly to block the force of Wilkes' attacks. Of course, when facing a sociopath with a powerful dust weapon, who better to have on your side than the resident dust expert? Wilkes clenched his teeth before pulling his sword back and giving a might swing, releasing another wave of electricity at the students. Weiss furrowed her eyes and swung her sword up as several more glyphs blocked the lightning strikes and reduced them to nothing. The other students started to get back up to their feet as Nora grabbed her grenade launcher and aimed it at the large man. She grinned as she fired several grenades at him that exploded in a mix of fire and pink smoke. Wilkes was pushed back as his feet skidded across the marble, but had no chance to respond as three figures blurred through the smoke towards him. He glared and prepared to attack, but suddenly stumbled as dozens of small knives started flying through the smoke and hit him long enough that they could get close. He grew impatient and changed the revolver to its light blue setting as he lifted his cleaver up above his head. He brought it down and watched as the spires of ice erupted from the ground and pierced through the body of the black-haired girl. Just as he believed he had killed one of them, the girl's body disappeared and she reappeared a few feet back, ran up the ice with her sword now changed into a sickle. She spun in the air as the ribbon extended and the sickle repeatedly slashed against the cleaver, forcing him to step back to preserve his stance as the two fighters flanked his sides. Sasuke and Pyrrha started swinging their swords at staggering speeds and tried to topple the massive man to no avail. He blocked Blake's sickle once more before turning on his feet and making a massive arc swipe, causing Sasuke to duck as the blade went over his head and Pyrrha to jump before the sword cut her in half. The redhead rotated in the air and extended Milo into its spear form to increase its power and reach. She thrust the spear at Wilkes, who was forced to block and step back as Sasuke spun on the ground and kicked one of his knees. He fell on his ass and desperately tried to block various attacks from the swift trio of fighters. He was able to hold them off before he was forced back again as Ruby fired her rifle at his blade and Kiba came charging in like a wild animal, sending jabs to shake his hold on his sword. Strikes and punches and slashes and bullets bounced off his sword and suit as he was nearly overwhelmed by the attacks that surrounded him. With an annoyed growl, he focused his aura as it glowed through the dust and made his blade illuminate with a faint blue light. He swung his blade in an upward diagonal slash, creating a jagged wall of ice in front of him that halted the attacks for a moment before the hunters in training maneuvered around it to continue. They tried to attack from the other side, but he swung his large cleaver around to create another enclosed space protected by ice. The frozen barrier grew upward until both sides connected and formed an uneven dome of ice around him. "Move aside!" They all jumped back after Weiss yelled her command and closed her eyes to focus her aura. The revolver on her rapier turned as a purple light covered her sword before opening her eyes and giving a mighty swing. A wave of purple energy flew from the tip of her blade and along the ground before impacting against the dome and making part of it break away. Just as Wilkes broke out with his sword now glowing green, he swung down in the same direction Weiss attacked from, and the floor started to splinter and schism. The penthouse shook with a natural force as a powerful force blasted through the ground and headed straight for Weiss. "Look out!" John pushed her out of the way and braced himself with his shield as the strike blasted him backwards and slammed him into the elevator doors hard enough to bend the doors. He felt the floor groaning and Pyrrha yelled, "John!" Ha! Wilkes followed through with his attack as he swung his blade around the whole room, causing blasts of immense power and schisms to break the whole room. The students that had to desperately dodge as the ground broke open and the glass shattered over them. Wilkes stopped swinging his sword as he looked at the effect his wind dust had on the room. The marble was split, the couches and art pieces were in shreds, and most of the glass was destroyed. Well, damn, this was going to take some extensive remodeling to fix after this was over. Also, he was going to need someone who could get bloodstains out of the marble. Wolf's head was finally knocked to the side as a collapsible arrow hit him in the head and blurred his vision. He stumbled and his knees nearly buckled before he covered his head and guarded against the onslaught of arrows that struck him. He sheathed and glared over his arm at the most recent attacker. Naruto had pulled himself up to his feet after receiving ample time to recover from his injury. He stood up holding Stormer with both hands and all of his short blades aligned along his arms with thin wire. His clothes were particularly singed, but now that he had recovered, he was ready for round two. Naruto sprinted forward, yelling at the top of his lungs as Wilkes squinted his eyes and gripped his blade tightly. He pulled back and swung it out in a wide arc to cleave the blonde apart, but his slash merely cut through air as Naruto leapt over it at the last moment. He threw his hand out and three of the short blades ran down the wire and nearly slashed through Wilkes' head as he leaned aside. Naruto quickly pulled the swords back and let the wire get some length before his blades formed a semicircle between the back of his arm and he landed on his feet. He quickly stepped in towards the man that towered over him and spun like a tornado, forcing Wilkes to raise his blade and block as a storm of blades and sparks rose in front of him. Wilkes was nearly overwhelmed by the various blades that came in from different directions and varying intervals. He had difficulty keeping track of the silver flashes, with sparing moments of the blonde hiding behind them. The old man grew tired of this road and held his arm out as the blades bounced harmlessly off of his dust suit. For the one instant the blades didn't move, he grabbed hold of the wire and pulled Naruto off of his feet and towards him to slice him down the center. As he brought his sword up, Pierre's spear was thrown with power from the boosters behind it, knocking aside his hand and letting the powerful blast of wind slice through the wall behind him. He was startled by this interruption and leaving just enough time for Naruto to escape his clutches and attack him. The 11 blades slashed against the suit, with the only result being that Wilkes stumbled backwards. The large man gripped his sword as the students all gathered together again and faced him with varying glares. They yelled as they charged forward and prepared to attack to corrupt him, the corrupt man. Sasuke ignored the devastating slashes that surrounded him as he stayed back and activated his semblance. He got a good look at the criminal's boss before taking a moment to retreat from battle. He caught sight of Tenten and Nora on the other side of the room, helping John get up to his feet and making sure he could stand after taking up the powerful attack that was aimed at Weiss. The dark-haired swordsman leapt over the bar and hid behind it as he looked for something. His eyes immediately landed on the girl lying on the ground and groaning after being sent flying into the selection of drinks earlier. He shook her shoulder and Yang grumbled, "Okay, what hit me and how hard?" Wilkes did, and very. Yang groggily rubbed her head. "And why didn't he fall down when I hit him? That usually works on everyone." Sasuke was looking around the floor. "His suit is woven with dust. He's essentially bulletproof. How the hell are we supposed to know that?" "Take it up with Weiss." Sasuke finally spotted what he was looking for as he picked up a bottle that was still intact. "Got it." Yang looked at the bottle with confusion before raising an eyebrow at his priorities. "Okay, I'm always up for a drink, but right now might not be the best time." Sasuke continued to drop the bottle between his hands to test out its falling speed before nodding. He held it up a little higher, activated the new semblance he felt in his body copy when he looked at Wilkes, and dropped the bottle, and watched as it fell like a slab of concrete and splintered the floor by his knees, getting a few cracks that leaked out the pricey drink inside. Yang looked down at the bottle with confusion before looking up at the boy responsible. "What the hell did you do?" "I knew it." The room shook again from Wilkes' rampage and the swordsman popped out from behind the counter. "Guys, he's using his semblance. He can change the weight of stuff he touches or the force that acts on it. He's making his blade heavier to block. Oh, that is so unfair." Yang stood up as well while Sasuke started climbing over the counter. "Let's go. We have to. Mr. Wilkes!" They froze when they heard a new voice join in on the chaos that filled the room. They looked over to see several men emerging from the stairway and look around in surprise. The hired guy asked, "Sir, what should we—" "Shoot them!" They complied immediately and pulled out rifles before aiming them at the first intruder they spotted. Several of them pointed towards Sasuke and fired as Yang pulled him back behind her. Save our asses!" Bullets started flying across the whole room, and the Beacon students had to dodge or find cover to avoid any damage. Most of the offensive team had to block and slice through the bullets, leaving this was open for attack from Wilkes. The students had to guard the dodge as the chance to counterattack were severely diminished. Sasuke spotted Tenten and Nora taking John behind a corner and using his shield to protect him from getting shot. He looked aside and Yang crouched beside him, annoyed and eager to get back in the game. He grabbed the bottle he used earlier and looked up just as Yang looked down towards him. They shared a look and nodded. Sasuke sprung up during the gunfire and threw the bottle as hard as he could, watching as it broke against one goon's face and splashed the rest of them with booze. He started running across the room with Yang following after before he yelled back, "Tenten!" His partner responded by jumping out from the corner and tossing knives with expert precision, disarming them from across the penthouse. Sasuke took the opportunity to leap forward and kick 3 of the stunned guards over the railing and down to the lower level. He quickly pulled out his sword and cut the railing to pieces as 2 guards tried to catch him on both sides. Yang came charging in and tackled both guys off the staircase and launched them down to the level below with their friends. She stood back up and gave a thumbs up to the boy above her before she heard more people start yelling and running up the stairs. More guys were flooding the stairs and charging towards her before Nora landed beside her and grinned as Mankiel extended in her hand. She twirled it around like a baton before skipping forward and swinging it into the front of the crowd, blasting them backwards and into the people behind them. Yang smiled as well, and her gauntlets extended down her arms before running in to join the fun. Sasuke and Tenten jumped down to help and watched as John awkwardly climbed down. He landed and stopped himself from stumbling over before the bunny-haired girl asked with concern, "You sure you can keep fighting or standing? That was a really nasty hit you took earlier." "I'm fine." John wanted to pat his own chest, but wasn't sure if he'd still be standing if he did that. He just fainted and gave a confident nod. "It wasn't as bad as you think. I just need to focus my aura. However, I do that, and I should fix up in no time, I hope." And the stairwell shook from both the pandemonium happening in front of them and in the penthouse above as he looked forward. I can't help at all up there. If these guys keep popping up, they're going to cause us more trouble." Sasuke reassured him with a pat on the shoulder, feeling a slight shudder in John's form at the extra strain to his injury. He immediately retracted his hand. "We'll handle these guys first, and then we'll go help them. They can handle themselves, so don't worry." John gave a small nod. "I guess sure. Heads up." Tenten pulled John aside as a suited thug came flying between them and slammed against the wall. Sasuke pulled his sword out and charged forward, leaping through the air and stopping two thugs down to the ground. He then jumped up and sliced more of the guards' rifles apart as Yang swooped in and sent them flying. The swordsman and brawler worked in tandem to defeat a large group of the thugs for hire stampeding up the stairs. Tenten vaulted over the railing and set knives in all directions to pin guys to the stairs, and while after Nora came in, happily swinging her hammer without a care in the world as their bodies went flying through the air like dolls. The four extremely destructive fighters were switching out and combining their skills to effectively handle the thugs with relative ease. John could only stare in amusement and shock as he had to climb down the stairs the normal way, making sure not to slip on a step or trip over the unconscious or moaning bodies of a man. John finally reached a few levels down to where his four friends had stopped beating the hell out of guards. He looked around at all the unconscious guys and had to admire that none of his friends were even winded from the effort. "Man, you guys handled that pretty quick." "Yeah," Yang offhandedly answered while holding one guy up by his collar before letting him drop to the floor. She looked around. For a bunch of criminals, these guys aren't exactly the best guard for a base of operations like this." Tenten retorted. "Are you complaining?" "No," she responded before waiting a moment and shrugging. "A little, but I was hoping for some action today. So far, all that's happening is I've threatened some dudes, got punched across the room, beat up some goons, and that's it." "We did get to see Wai Sing." Yang gave a snarky grin at the thought. "Oh, almost forgot about that." "I can't wait to bring that up later." "You're not going to leave it alone, are you?" "Not a chance." They heard the echo of a dozen more people coming up from the lower levels to fight. Sasuke turned towards the sound. "That sounds a lot heavier than before." Oh, me first." Nora bounced happily as she grabbed her large hammer and stood at the top of the stairs. "I get first dibs on sending those guys flying," Yang encouraged. Knock them out." The hunters in training waited in silence before the figures finally appeared in sight and surprised them. Instead of the usual big dudes in suits, these were tall, metallic men. They were lean and spotless, with black and gray metal coating with red trimming going over their entire forms. Their heads were fashioned in the form of an old knight's helmet, with visors that illuminated at the sight of the students. The students all froze when they saw the new army of enemies coming up the stairs, a squadron of Elysian Knights Type 130. They swung their arms down, then machine guns formed from their hands. They aimed them up at the stairs, and a robotic voice rang out from a speaking system. "Threat detected. Course of action. Eliminate." John reached and grabbed his shield before diving in front of his teammate. "Nora, watch out!" Sasuke, Yang, and Tenten had to jump back for cover as the knights opened fire against them. John grabbed Nora and ducked down behind his shield just as the ammunition started bouncing off of it. The mounted Gatlings decimated the concrete around their targets, and their bullets continued to ricochet off the antique weapon. John could feel his grip weaken from continuous strain of blocking the deadly onslaught. He tried to ignore the pain as he felt something poke his cheek softly. He looked down to see Nora bent down beside him and gave him a big, happy smile. "Thanks, John. That would have been pretty bad if I got caught in that." She then looked up in serious thought despite their concerning circumstances. "I wonder if I would become Nora Soup." Ew, I bet that would taste nasty, or maybe I'd be pretty good if I ate something sweet before, but I probably wouldn't have been allowed in class if I was just soup. She then went back to smiling and reassured her leader. Good thing you're quick to guard, huh, John? John was stunned by her seemingly carefree attitude, even though their voices were nearly drowned out by the sound of bullets bouncing off of his shield. However, her smile and bubbly attitude succeeded in calming down his nerves and getting some feeling back in his arms. He gave a weak smile and droned, well, I guess I'm sort of used to getting the brunt of this stuff with my shield, so no problem. Nora sat down while hugging her knees to make sure she was still behind the shield before asking, so what now? I remember Ren telling me these guys have a lot of bullets to fire, like a ton. Oh, John deflated, having to toss his plan of just holding off until they ran out of ammunition. His arms would give sooner than they would stop. He raked his brain and thought before an idea formed in his head. A weird, unorthodox, silly idea. He turned to his orange-haired friend. Nora, I have an idea, but I need your help. She perked up. Can I blow stuff up? Probably. Yay! What's the plan? And John leaned over and whispered in her ear so she could hear him clearly. She blinked once to make sure she heard right before looking at him. Are you sure it can take it? Are you sure it can take it? Won't know until we try. Get ready. Nora nodded and grabbed her launcher before pressing it against the shield they hid behind. John narrowed his eyes. 3. Nora gripped her weapon tighter. 2. John closed his eyes and leaned away. Fire. Bang. The grenade exploded against the shield and sent it flying forward at accelerating speeds. The shield was so fast that it broke and tore through every AK until a unit in its way. However, when it got to the bottom of the stairs and there were no more robots to clear through, the shield rebounded off the concrete wall and headed right back up towards them. The ginger girl tackled her friend to the ground, and the shield went over them and knocked down the door at the top of the stairs. The remaining AK units saw what had happened before looking between each other. They retracted the Gatlings and swapped out for long titanium blades as they charged up the stairs. Nora and John sat up before Yang grabbed them by their collars. Nice job, Barf Boy. Now through the doors we go. She pulled them along and ran through the doorway. They busted out and into a floor with tons of desks and offices. Sasuke and Tenten were already inside, looking around for anything they could use to their advantage. The bunny-haired girl noticed John's shield lying on the ground beside the warped door. She picked it up and noticed that there wasn't a single extra scratch or dent in it after what it went through. Her eyes began to sparkle and she marveled at its craftsmanship. Holy crap, what is this thing made of? Diamonds, grim attacks, dust attacks, bullets, a freaking grenade, and it's still holding together. John walked up and let out a breath of relief. Oh good, it's not broken. And John, the taller blonde, was startled by Tenten's proximity and eagerness. Yeah, can I look at your weapons more when we get back to school? I gotta know what they're made out of. Okay, Yang noted. Geez, and I thought Ruby was the only weapon weirdo in the group. She's not, Sasuke sighed before looking back at and saw the AK units were finally inside as they flooded into the room. John finally got his shield back and the 5 students backed up together in a circle as the robots surrounded them on all sides. One AK raised its blade towards the students. Surrender and be eliminated. Don't you mean or? I'm perfectly aware of what I was programmed to say. Bang. Sasuke's sword was shot from its sheath and the raven-haired boy dashed and grabbed it in the air, doing a quick spin before slicing one robot directly down the middle. The two halves fell apart from each other before Sasuke looked up to see all the robots looking towards him. He gripped his sword tightly. One robot tried to screw him through, but he leapt over the blade and sliced the robot's torso off. He kicked off the destroyed body and cocked his shotgun before slicing another AK's arm off and blasting it apart with a shot to the head. His eyes changed red and he dashed forward to slice and cut apart several more knights before they could even react. He blocked a sword from behind without even looking before aiming his gun under his arm and blowing off the body of the unit behind him. He then fired his gun again to propel him forward and kick several of them into each other before slicing them up in one go. Yang launched herself upwards with a blast from her gauntlets. Before she spotted her first prey, she propelled herself back down and squashed it into the floor before firing 2 rounds on both sides to knock back surrounding units. She smirked before she jumped up and sent one flying with the right hook. She turned back and hit one aside with her elbow before starting to strike it everywhere with quick and devastating punches, shattering the metal and sending some bolts flying. She then sent it upwards with an uppercut and grabbed its leg before spinning around so fast that she ripped off its leg and sent it crashing into a desk. She looked down at the torn off metal limb as it shot out sparks before grinning and holding it like a bat for fun. Nora brought her hammer down and flattened one AK into a pancake. She pulled up her hammer and rested it over her shoulders as she started backstepping from the titanium blades. She dodged and smacked one unit away before leaning from another attack. As she spun back, heeled down her shoulders, she activated the rockets and swatted one of them away and through several walls and desks. John stopped just short of being hit with the robot Nora sent flying as he gripped Corsair more tightly. He looked around and tried to find a way he could assist his friends before he saw a knight come running towards him. He panicked and stumbled back before holding up his shield as the blade slashed and bounced off it. He tried to attack with his sword, but his blade was countered and nearly swatted out of his hand by the harsh block. John did what he could and rammed his shield forward hard enough to knock the soldier bot back. He prepared to fight again as it immediately raced to its feet. But a knife came flying in and pierced one side of the robot's head until it poked through the other end. Sparks flew from the sudden obstruction, and it fell over as Tintin ran past with more knives between her fingers. She threw them with deadly accuracy, hitting targets on all sides and even nailing the ones not in her direct sight. She ducked a swing and opened her palm. A small blade slipped into her fingers, and she skewered it through a knight's head. She leaped towards the last two in her sight, and double-edged sickles formed in her hands. She dodged them both in the visors of the robots, and they fell over before she took a moment to pause and catch her breath. Heads up! The bun-haired girl ducked as an AK torso came flying over her head and broke through a plane of glass. She stood back up before looking over at the boisterous blonde with a dubious stare. Really? And Yank laughed and swung the ripped off metal leg around playfully. Sorry, couldn't help myself. She tossed the leg aside and looked at the pieces of metal and robotic remains that littered the floor. She whistled. Man, we sure kick ass when we get into it. John looked around at the heaps they had created from the advanced robotic soldiers. Do you think this is all of them? Sasuke shook his head. No. Why do you say that? He shook his head. Trust me, there's always more where that came from. Nora was crouched down by a fallen knight and lifted its arm, inspecting the sharp blade they had been dodging before. She poked the arm innocently. Man, these guys aren't all that good when they're just waving their swords around. Wonder why they don't stick to guns. Those were actually pretty cool. Maybe they were just programmed to attack their targets up close. Well, it's a whole lot less effective than machine guns. That probably just goes to show that they built these things a little too weak for normal jobs and stuff. And John didn't have it in him to tell the truth, that these things weren't the weak ones. It was just that these four were really, really, really strong, but he decided against it, let them enjoy their moment. He looked around and noticed no one else was coming. I think we need to get back up to the others. They might need our help. Yang nodded as Nora tossed the arm aside. Good idea. The 5 teens started heading towards the door and walked over the broken heaps of robots in their way. Creak! The strange noise echoed through the room as it sounded like the building was settling. They heard a loud shift and crash happen just above their heads and looked up as the ceiling started to crack in the middle of the room. It then started to glow a faint red and orange before turning yellow and white. Yang's eyes widened. Oh, move! They all ran out the door as the ceiling came crashing down in a mess of debris, rock, glass, and dust. From the smoke screen of crap coming down, they could clearly spot Kiba landing on his back and groaning in pain with the bruised arm as Ren landed on his feet before collapsing to his knees. Nora spotted her friend and ran to him through the chaos. Ren! There was also a faint light as a ball of blue energy came crashing down into the floor and broke apart to reveal a tired Blake and weakening Weiss inside of it. They all had scuff marks and bruises over their bodies, the damages remaining despite the help of their aura. Yang spotted her partner and friend in distress and ran over to help them, as Sasuke and Tenten did the same for Kiba. John was standing there in shock as he saw a figure stand up in the middle of the room, standing around a dozen broken rocks that were glowing orange and particularly melted as Wills himself. The massive man had some bruises on his face, and his clothes were partly crumpled, but he still wasn't hurt too bad. His sword had switched to an orange setting that caused the air around his blade to emit intense heat and warp its surroundings, with the searing red substance dripping down from the ceiling over them. With disdain clearly taken over the subtle anger he was showing earlier, he looked over and saw Sasuke and the others that had vanished from their fight. He spoke with a hint of relief in his voice as he gripped his sword. I was wondering where the rest of you went. I wouldn't want to miss the chance of putting you together with your friends. He started lifting his sword and pulled it back for a big swing. Sasuke started standing up and prepared to block whatever was coming before he felt a tight grip on his arm. Kiba grabbed both of his teammates' arms and struggled to get traction before he yelled, "Move!" Wolf swung his sword and watched as the ground he cut burned orange before creating an explosive wave of lava leading towards his targets. Sasuke and Tenten each took one of their comrades' arms and jumped out of the way as lava started destroying the ground and wall. It glowed bright one more time before erupting into an extremely powerful blast and blowing the students back off their feet. Withstanding the blistering heat and shock wave that ran over their bodies, the hunters in training struggled to face their enemy as he scoffed at them. They wanted to rush him, but suddenly realized that the floor was separated with large lines of lava that kept them away from each other. He smirked. "And you all barged in here with such ferocity. Where did that energy go?" "Wilsk!" The old man looked up to the hole he came through to see the red-hooded girl and Naruto standing 2 levels above him. Naruto had stretched the wire across the hole, and Ruby had used her scythe to pull it back like a slingshot. Pyrrha had placed her stuff at the highest point of retracted wire, and the blonde yelled with intention, "Right here!" Ruby pulled off the string and watched as it launched the redhead down like a rocket. Pyrrha yelled and drew her shield and spear as Wilkes raised an arm and blocked the shield that nearly cracked his head. The redhead warrior then flicked his arm aside and tried to strike his head, but he leaned back and let the spear bounce off of his suit. Wilkes knocked her back and Pyrrha flipped through the air before landing in a 3-point stance. She glared up at him with burning intensity before she shifted her spear into a sword and dashed forward. She bounced and started unleashing a flurry of strikes over Wilkes' entire body, leaving him stunned at the speed, dexterity, and power she showed with every hit that nearly struck him. He struggled to keep up with the warrior as she pressed him back and took ground. Wilkes felt her sword scraped against the back of his, and he brought his massive cleaver down towards her head. Pyrrha merely opened her palm and flicked her wrist as the sword veered off and missed her by a foot. He didn't have any time to stare down in shock as the redhead leaped forward and pierced the tip of her sword against his chest. She then extended it into her spear and launched it forward. The large criminal let out a gasp of pain as he was lifted off of his feet for a moment and forced back several feet. The others stared in surprise at the first sign of some substantial damage done to their opponent. Pyrrha stood up and stared the disgruntled man down. Dust isn't completely invincible, and even if it was, it can't last forever. All our attacks and strikes are accumulating and tearing your defenses down. She aimed her spear towards him. "We told you that today would be the end of your reign." Wilkes' mouth started twisting as a thick growl escaped his lips. He groaned. "Shut up!" He gripped his blade and swung it around as he created a large gathering of power around himself. "Shut up!" He slammed his sword down and the shockwave went out in every direction, knocking Pyrrha off her feet and unsettling the already fallen structure of the room. He grabbed his sword again. "Heads up!" That was all he could register as Ruby came flying down from the upper levels and landed a dropkick across the man's face. He stumbled aside as his vision flashed white and he saw the little scythe-wielding girl land with her massive weapon extended out. Ruby's body disappeared in a swirl of petals as she dashed back and forth around Wilkes' body, leaving quick strikes with crescent rows that could only be noticed with the sound of a metal clashing against his suit. The gray man staggered and almost doubled over as their attacks were doing more and more to affect his body. He nearly fell to a knee after Ruby struck him again and knocked his head back with a strike to his chin. She appeared behind him again and prepared for another dash. "Enough!" Wilkes reached back and grabbed Ruby by the throat just as she was about to attack. Ruby gasped in pain as the grip increased around her throat before Wilkes tossed her into the floor and watched her bounce painfully. Yang screamed and ran to her sister's side. "Ruby! I will not be humiliated by you little cretins!" Wilkes brought his sword down and created a wave of lava that soared towards the two sisters. Yang shielded her wary sister and held her arm out to block the dust attack that was coming at them. But before it could hit, Tenten dove in front of them and blocked the attack as it veered off in both directions. Yang and Ruby looked up at the bun-haired girl as her long sleeve were slowly burning down the arm. But Tenten didn't scream as the burning attack didn't hit her skin directly. Her arms were coated up to the elbow with uneven metal that was now searing hot from the intense heat. Tenten struggled and let the metal covering bowl pop open and fall from her arms before any lasting damage could be dealt. She panted and looked down at her hands before giving a relief sigh and opening her hands again. Her silver aura glowed over her hands before appearing to turn physical and changing into knives. The throwing blades took full form, and she grabbed them before holding them between each of her fingers. Her friends now suddenly realized where she hid all her weapons. Tenten jumped to her feet and started throwing the blades one by one at Wilkes as he just used his sleeves to deflect them. With his attackers separated and confined to their spots for the moment, he had a perfect chance to finish them off. He pressed the triggers, switching the dust revolver to green and letting the power illuminate his blade. He slowly began to raise it until Naruto dropped down and landed on top of the blade, forcing it back down and cracking the ground beneath it. Wilkes was shocked as Naruto looked up at him with a levered glare. Boom! The ground beneath them exploded and Wilkes started falling down into the level below. Ah! He crashed and cracked into the floor before he started groaning and attempting to lift himself up. The fatigue of using so much of his aura and semblance to fight them off was beginning to take a toll. Plus, he wasn't exactly a fighter. He learned to defend himself as a young adult, and he had learned how to kill people over his life, but they had to be done quick. He didn't have the stamina and endurance to go on in a long fight like this. That was where the kids had him outmatched. He heard the sound of a landing body and gave a tired sigh when he guessed who it was. He slowly inclined his head and looked up to see Naruto standing across from him and glaring down with disdain. Wilkes only hoped he could convey the overwhelming feeling of disgust and hate this boy was causing him to experience right now. The elderly man started to push himself up to his feet and glared down the young man that challenged him. They stood across each other and gripped their respective weapons as tightly as possible. Naruto dashed forward and reduced the distance to his enemy before jumping up and slashing at the old man's face. Wilkes blocked the swarm of blades and knocked the whiskered boy aside before charging after him. Naruto rolled and skid over the ground before flipping over Wilkes' blade as it obliterated the wall and desk behind him. Naruto whipped his blades down and Wilkes flinched under the pressure of his attacks. Wilkes tried to grab the young man out of the air, but it proved futile to snatch the agile boy. Naruto landed behind the criminal and gripped Stormer with both hands before spinning around and slashing over his back a dozen times. Wilkes attempted to back kick him, but Naruto leaned aside and backflipped out of his range. The Kingpin spun around quickly and fired several blasts of concentrated wind at the blonde that ripped trenches through the floor. Naruto kept dodging and avoiding the devastating attacks that threatened to tear him apart. He ran and jumped off the desk before flicking a short blade into the ceiling and using the wires to maneuver around his enemy's flank. Wilkes kept firing wave after wave of attacks, hoping to catch Naruto as he kept avoiding them by the skin of his teeth. Naruto twisted in the air and flicked two blades towards the Crown Lord's head. Wilkes just smacked them aside as the blades slid back down the wire they were connected to. He looked back up. Thwack! And Naruto landed a punch across the old man's face. He landed before turning around and jumping up to strike him again. Naruto landed one more strong hook across Wilkes' face before the elderly man let go of his sword and grabbed the boy's wrist. Naruto was pulled back and he kicked the Kingpin in the chin before his other wrist was tightly gripped by the old man. Wilkes raised the boy up as he thrashed around and tried to escape, taking a deep breath to calm himself down after the extensive battle, but to no avail. The graying man inhaled deeply before a cocky smirk spread over his face. It was a good effort from all of you. It's not over yet, Naruto responded pointedly as he furiously kicked against the dust suit, even as his attacks bounced off pointlessly. The whiskered boy yelled, "We said we kicked your ass, and we won't stop until we do. Even though you're coming to an end. I told you, it isn't over yet." Naruto kept thrashing around under his grip as Wilkes calmly spoke. "I really am grateful that you came back to me willingly like this. You would not believe the arguments I had with myself about the proper way to handle you. On one hand, you know some intimate details of my business venture. On the other, why would I ever waste the manpower in trying to find such a worthless kid such as yourself?" Naruto stopped thrashing around and just glared Wilkes down angrily. "I only wanted to take you on because you had some skill in sneaking around. Besides that, you were nothing to me. No connections to call to, no people that love you, no one to care about you if you ever disappeared. You were perfect in one field and one field only. You were expendable." He shook his head disappointedly. "And you couldn't even do that right." Naruto gritted his teeth and spit in the old man's face. Wilkes paid no mind to the spit that dripped down his chin as Naruto growled, "Go to hell, you bastard!" Wilkes just smiled. Save me a spot. Naruto gasped as his strength flattened as he felt like he was carrying a boulder on his back, then a car, then a truck. He struggled to hold himself up, but found the increasing force to be too much to handle. Wilkes smiled before releasing his grip and letting Naruto crater the ground beneath him. Gah! Naruto struggled to pull himself up before Wilkes' foot pressed down on his head. The old man spoke. Goodbye, Naruto, and thank you for your services. The ground broke beneath him, and Naruto was left to fall into the next level. The moment he hit the ground again, he shattered the floor and fell down into the next floor. And again, his screams echoed as he was sent falling down every level below them as the floors couldn't handle his weight anymore. Naruto, no! Ruby, wait! Wilkes heard something zip by him and watched as the little hooded girl went chasing after her friend, while the armored boy she pulled screamed like a girl. The black-haired girl landed by the hole Naruto formed before looking up and staring directly into Wilkes' eyes. The two foes kept their stoic glare before Blake chased after her later. Wilkes calmly whipped the spit off his chin before letting out a small grunt. As he reached down for his weapon, he pulled it back up before he heard pebbles shift and fall down from the gaping hole above him. He looked up to see Sasuke, the tattooed boy, and the blonde girl glaring down at him. The old man smiled. Do you all want to join him next? Hunting? Ruby, I think I'm gonna... And John covered his mouth as Ruby pulled him down several levels to catch up to their friends. Hold on, John, we're almost there. Ruby reassured him as she kept jumping down each level. They found a hole. They landed at the last hole before Ruby let her squeamish friend go and walked over to the edge. The lower level was pitch black and she couldn't see anything, but there was a wire tied around a creaking, broken part of the ceiling with his blade all around their feet. And John swallowed the pile that threatened to come up his throat and took a deep breath. He looked over at his short friend. Is he there? She squinted her eyes and looked below to try and see him. I can't see him. I don't know if he's down there. He's down there. Ruby and John looked over as Blake dropped down beside them. She looked over the edge before leaping down and disappearing from sight. Ruby and John looked between each other before the light flashed down and the whole lower floor was suddenly illuminated. Blake walked away from the light switch and looked over to see Naruto kneeling on the ground with his arms holding something that kept him from falling over. Ruby beamed a smile as she jumped down to him. Naruto! She saw that he didn't react to her voice and said his name again. Naruto? She heard him mumble something to himself so quietly that she couldn't hear a single word. She leaned in closer as Blake curiously waited to the side. Naruto, ugh. Ruby let out a little yelp as Naruto finally responded and looked up at her. She calmed down and smiled when she saw he was still alive. Naruto, you're okay. She then took a second to see his arms were shaking from trying to hold onto the wire in his hands. His clothes were slightly ripped from the fall and he had bruises and blood over his limbs. She noticed his bandana had some rips that let his blonde hair out, and she shrugged. Well, you're alive. Yeah, I noticed. He let out a small chuckle. Thanks for coming to help me, by the way. He tiredly looked around and asked, do you know where my swords are? I think I lost them in the fall. Slam. John landed face first in the ground before standing back up to reveal all the swords he was holding. I got him. He wiped some dust off his shoulder and walked over to his friend's side. I thought you'd probably want them back. Naruto ignored his state and gave his friend a thankful nod. Thanks, buddy. No problem. John held them out for his fellow blonde to take back, but Naruto just stayed silent and looked at him and Ruby. The two awkward teens looked between each other before asking their friends, what's wrong? Naruto realized they noticed he hadn't moved a muscle, and he tried to play it off. He gave a nervous chuckle. Nothing, but, could you hang on to those for just a minute? I'm sort of, he can't move. Naruto sighed when Blake was the one to point out his situation with a monotone in her voice. He noticed Ruby and John's surprised expression as he gave a small nod. Yeah, I can't stand up. I'm pretty sure I'll fall over on my own feet if I tried right now. He groaned and tried to pull himself up with the wires wrapped around his hands, but the small crater beneath his knees creaked when he did. And I can't lift myself up. Wilkes made me too heavy. Well, that's no problem. John placed Naruto's blade aside and stepped over to his friend's side. He knelt down and grabbed his shoulders. Here, let me try to help you up. Naruto stayed still for a moment and tried to think of what to say, but Blake was the first to point it out. John, if he can't even lift himself up, then I'm certain that means he's too heavy too. No, it's all right. Trust me, he said confidently before looking down at Naruto. All right, you can let go of the wires now. Naruto didn't do anything at first. He really didn't want to discourage his friend, but he was pretty sure John couldn't see the skeptical look on his face at the moment. Well, you live and you learn. He lessened his grip on the wires. Whoa, okay, that's heavy. John yelled before he straightened and pulled on Naruto's shoulders as hard as he could. His face was going red from the effort as he yelled, Okay, I got it. And don't worry, man. You'll be up in no time. Just a little more. Come on, a little. Ruby finally said something. John, you already slid on your butt. John opened his eyes and looked to see he had already fallen on his butt and wasn't lifting Naruto up at all. He let go of his shoulders. Oh, sorry. Naruto gave his friend a thankful smile. No worries, John. I'm pretty sure I weigh as much as a truck. That being said, that's been binging and doesn't do any running. Nice simile, Blake dryly noted. And boom! They heard a distant rattle and felt a small aftershock from the battle that continued above their heads. Ruby walked closer to the center of the circle and looked up. Yang and the others, they're still fighting him. Naruto started narrowing his eyes before grunting and trying to pull himself up with the wires again, causing the ceiling to settle and creak again. They looked at him and Ruby tried to stop him from hurting himself. Naruto, you have to stop. Can't, he simply responded as he started straightening himself out with a little more effort. John tried to do the same. It's okay, man. We came up with a plan with everybody else before we came down here. They can handle it. Yeah, but I won't. Snap! The part of the ceiling he tied around finally broke, and Naruto slammed straight down on his face, causing more of the floor to crack under his insane weight. His friends flinched and wanted to help him out, but could only stare as he tried pushing against the floor again and attempted to lift himself up, putting serious strain on his hands and knees as he did. Blake stepped forward and decided to be the voice of reason. They can still fight, but you can barely move. You may want to keep fighting, but you can't. I know I can't, Naruto responded as he kept trying to stand up, but I need to. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath before he kept trying. When I try to do something right, I fail. When I try to fix something, I screw up. And when I try to handle something by myself, I realize too late that I'm just walking into ruin. He lowered his head as his teeth started to grind. I was so lucky you guys joined me, but I was afraid that if there was a time I needed to save someone, I just fell, and I am, right now, he grunted as he forced himself to sit up and looked back up through the hole he fell through. I'm not going to just lie down when everyone else is fixing my mistakes. I need to be there. I don't want to fail anymore. Naruto attempted to stand up, but the semblance power being placed on him caused him to tumble forward. But before he could hit the ground, he felt something wrap around both his shoulders and keep him steady. He looked to his side to see Ruby with her arms wrapped around his shoulder to keep him from falling. Her eyes closed and letting out a groan of struggle at the action. He looked to the other side and saw John doing the same, pain very clear on his face from lifting his part of the load. The two teens started to glow red and white as they subconsciously used their aura to help them with the lifting. Naruto saw a black ribbon drop down by his face and looked up to see Blake holding the other end from the hole above them. Naruto blinked in surprise before grabbing hold of the ribbon and steadying himself. With help from his friends, Naruto was finally standing on his feet, holding the ribbon to right himself and his two friends on either side to catch him in case. The aura started to fade before John asked, So, what do we do now? Naruto thought intently for a moment before he looked aside at his blades and the wire ripped between their hooks. Light bulb, a very dim, low-watt light bulb, but a light bulb nonetheless. Ruby, yeah, wanna take another slingshot? She gave a cheeky smile. Totally. Hunting. Yang shuffled forward with her fist up in her boxing stance as she charged her opponent. She threw punches that fired explosive rounds across the room while Wilkes knocked them away with his sword. Sasuke came flying over Yang's flank and rushed Wilkes with a flash of his sword. He couldn't block in time, so Wilkes just raised his arm and covered as much of himself as he could as Sasuke's strikes covered his entire body. Got you, bastard! Kiba yelled as he popped up behind the large old man and took a hold of his collar and suit. With a loud roar, he pulled the man off of his feet and tossed him over his shoulder. Wilkes flailed through the air before he crashed into a few desks and laid there for a moment. Kiba flinched and with a grimace looked down at the burns he received earlier when Wilkes first used his lava dust. Sasuke and Yang came up to him. You alright? Yeah, arm just feels a little stiff is all. Kiba played it off with a grin and pointed to the level above them. Just gotta wait until the others get started and then we can start knocking this prick down a few pegs. He rubbed his arms a little. Probably should avoid any more heavy lifting until then. Kiba, we need help. Can you come down here? Kiba raised an eyebrow before walking over to the hole and looking down it. He could barely see Ruby at all and just yelled down in response. What do you need? We got some heavy lifting we need help with. Ugh, figures. Kiba groaned before just jumping down and seeing what it was they needed. Are you high or just incredibly stupid? Just shut up and help me. Fine, make me do this shit. Dude, when we get back, you are cutting down on the lunches. Salads for you and yoga. Shut up. Yang shrugged her shoulders and laughed. Sounds like Naruto's still kicking. Boom. An explosion hit Yang's back and sent her flying over the hole and landing painfully on her front. Sasuke looked back and saw Wilkes lifting himself up, a little worse for wear but still able to move. He smirked. And here I believed you children were smart enough not to turn your backs on your enemies. Oh, pretty sure there's only one guy that seems making bad decisions today. Sasuke thought another explosion had erupted behind him as a crazy fire source started to glow. They looked back and saw Yang standing back up, fire flowing off of her body as she balled her fist. She turned and glared at Wilkes. Her eyes turned beet red and all senses of playfulness now absent from her demeanor. She cracked her knuckles. Hurting my buddies, trying to kill my sister in a long list of screw-ups. The worst was pissing me off as much as you did. Yang dashed forward, crashing the ground beneath her before appearing in front of Wilkes and landing a staggering punch in his stomach. His suit flashed silver and the blast was diverted, but Yang's punch flowed through and sent the man flying back. She threw her arms down and let the fire roar even higher before she rushed him in her boxing stance. She stood back up and changed the revolver to its ice setting. He gagged the girl's distance and swung his blade out to catch her just as she charged. Yang came to a stop and blocked his sword with her gauntlets, causing a massive conflict of ice and fire to cross and destroy each other. Yang pushed up the blade back and he gave a loud grunt as he spun around and tried to strike from the other side. The boxer yelled and knocked the blade back with equal ferocity as he turned back around. The kingpin finally held the blade up and brought it down with the extra force of his semblance down on the huntress. Yang crossed her arms and held them up to block the massive cleaver as it made contact and forced her feet almost completely into the ground. Yang struggled as her arms started dipping in as the ice tried to overtake her and the weight of the blades continued to increase over her head. The teen's knees nearly buckled as Wilkes continued to push the blade down on her. Ha! Yang pushed up and flung her arms out, knocking the blade up high and reeling back with a haymaker to land on the crime lord. He protected himself and brought his sword down to guard against her punch, but Yang's cross landed and there was a resounding crack through the floor. The kingpin just blinked before looking down in shock at the crack near the bottom of his blade's revolver, causing the grounded dust cartridge to malfunction and let out sparks. Yang's fire dissipated and her eyes turned back to lilac as she jumped back and out of his range. Sasuke leapt over her head and sheathed his blade again, looking like he was going to make a follow-up attack on his old boss, but instead he drew his sword from its sheath as it flashed into waves of silver. He sliced the ceiling into pieces and disappeared in the debris as it fell on Wilkes. Ready! They looked up to see a bright white jigsaw with a rotating snowflake at its center. The dust parted to reveal Weiss had created a glyph in front of Tenten, Ren, Nora, and Pyrrha while they aimed their respective weapons at Wilkes. Her eyes perverted when she yelled, "Fire!" Ren, Nora, Pyrrha fired and Tenten threw as many knives as she could as they all aimed at Wilkes. The projectiles shifted through the glyphs, shining white for a moment before speeding forward and ripping through Wilkes' suit. The large man gasped in pain as the ammunition powered up by dust shredded through his dust suit, impacting against his body and further reducing his waning aura reserves. "No!" he yelled and passed his aura through his blade, causing the unstable dust to discharge and release fire, wind, lightning, and ice upwards and destroying the ceiling. Weiss and the others had to retreat away from the danger as Yang and Sasuke had to cover their eyes from the light of the destructive power. Yang! They turned back to see Ruby had jumped up a few levels and was waving for their attention. She yelled over the noise of the elements and ceiling crashing. "We need your help with moving Naruto up a level. He's too much for just us." Yang yelled back. "What are you guys even trying to do?" Naruto thinks we can use his weight to help us, but he weighs more than we thought, and we can only get him up one level. We need you to help bring him up to Wilsk. Just get him up one level and set it up for whatever you're doing. Sasuke interrupted before he looked at Yang. Go help them with whatever they need. I'll make sure Wilsk gets down there. The loud noises of the discharging element started to die down as the busty blonde asked over the noise, "You sure?" The raven-haired boy activated his semblance, letting his eyes turn into an eerie red color and nodded, "Trust me." Yang jumped down and followed after her sister as Sasuke was left alone on the floor to face their enemy. He stood up and turned to see Wolf's hunch over with his grip still tight on his cleaver, even as the elements continued sparking from it uncontrollably. His suit had holes and scratches all over it until parts of his sleeves were just tattered, and it didn't look like it could provide much more protection. He was injured, weakened, and unprotected. For a man as paranoid and domineering as Wolf's, this was one of the worst situations to find himself in. Uncertain territory. The graying man looked up, panting heavily as his eyes met with Sasuke's. He growled, "You disappoint me." Sasuke responded, "That could make someone like you miserable." Wolf was furious as the dust properties discharged with even more intensity and were directed towards the younger man. Sasuke ducked to the side and charged at the larger man as he kept an eye on his surroundings. Wolf swung his blade and unleashed waves of fire and dust. "You were smarter, you were stronger, you were the better of the two, so how could you go along with that fool and abandon my generosity like that?" "Easy. Because I hate you and this stupid business," Sasuke yelled back as he ran up to Wilk's side and left a flurry of kicks and slashes over his side, still hitting some of the dust suit but also landing hits that actually caused the man to stagger. Sasuke overwhelmed him with speed. "Getting to walk away from you and your influence was the best decision I could make. And now," Sasuke appeared over Wolf's head and landed an axe kick that nearly knocked him down, "I get to come back and break everything else down." Wolf caught Sasuke's sword with his blade and pushed him back. He started swinging his massive sword with extra speed as he and the young man traded blows. He yelped out, I could have actually used someone like you." He swung up and Sasuke parried. "A talented fighter, a low kick, a disciplined warrior, and if you use that name of yours." They crossed blades and tried to overwhelm each other as the Crown Lord snarled, "You could have struck fear into the hearts of any man that tried to cross you." Sasuke seemed unnerved by that suggestion before he was filled with anger and started pressing Wolf's blade back. He growled through his teeth, "I will not become like that. No." The dust activated and lightning coursed through Sasuke's whole body, causing the boy to scream in pain before he was blasted back. Wolf shook his head and started stalking forward. "You'll always be so much less than what you could be if you delved into the practice your history is known for, be it the truth or a tale. Then you." He was immediately silenced when Sasuke's whole body was slowly engulfed in fire. The red-eyed boy slowly stood up and felt the new surge of power course through his body. He had to admit, as far as a useful semblance went, getting stronger with damage was up there for people in their profession. Sasuke opened his eyes again and leveled a glare at the large man, unnerving the kingpin and causing him to freeze. Wolf prepared for another attack, but Sasuke calmly sheathed his blade. Wolf stated in surprise before questioning, "What? Are you not going to finish this fight after all?" "I'm not the one that's going to finish this," Sasuke plainly stated as he reached down and cocked the top end of his sheath. He looked back up at the man. "I'm the one that needs to break your hold and knock you down, but I won't finish this." "That's right." Wolf grabbed his cleaver and activated the dust as he charged forward before bringing it up and down on Sasuke's head. "You won't." Sasuke was still before his eyes narrowed and he dropped into a long stance. Everything around him suddenly froze and moved in slow motion. The particles of dust in the air, the element surging off of the heavy cleaver coming down towards him. It felt like he could predict the next move they would make. Sasuke pulled the trigger, and the small ignition from firing the gun merged with the flames around him and caused an inferno to erupt. Sasuke pulled his sword out with the flames covering his body, roaring like the sun and slashing against the cleaver, breaking it off from where Yang cracked it earlier and destroying the weapon entirely. Wolf stumbled back in shock and looked down at the remains of his broken weapon. Sasuke jumped up and landed against the ceiling before launching himself down and tackling Wilsk into the floor, shattering the ground and causing them to fall several floors down before Sasuke separated from him and let him crash against the ground. Wilsk lifted himself up, stumbling and trying to find his footing. As he rubbed his head, he looked around. Ready! His eyes widened before he looked across the room and saw where the voice had come from. He saw Naruto directly across from him, with his body still under the effect of his semblance, but somehow standing up. He was leaning back against nearly a dozen metal wires being held between the blonde girl and brunette boy from earlier on either side, both struggling to hold him up like this. The short-hooded girl and bathroom attendant was trying to keep him steady from behind as they aimed him forward. It kind of looked like a slingshot. Blake dashed in front of the side and tossed her sickle, wrapping it around Wolf's leg before tightening its hold and keeping him stuck in one place. Oh, that little mother! Now! Ah! Yang and Kiba roared before they pulled with all their might and sent Naruto flying across the room. Naruto struggled to right himself in the air, but reeled his fist back and glared at Wolf as he came in fast. Wolf grit his teeth and pulled back before throwing a fist forward in retaliation to catch Naruto's head and break his neck. Naruto barely moved his head aside and let Wolf's fist scrap his chin before pushing back. And crack! Naruto's punch broke Wolf's nose before he followed through with his enhanced punch. Arrgh! Naruto sent Wolf flying backwards and crashed in through the window. The large man's body flew through the air, flying away from the relief building and clear across the street. His flight finally came to an end when he crashed through the ceiling of one of the shorter buildings and crashed into an office. He tried to stay conscious, but the pain from his shattered nose caused him to fall back and pass out. Naruto fell from his launch and started sliding over the floor. He became disoriented and couldn't get a good grip off the ground as he started heading towards the hole in the window he had sent Wolf flying through. He couldn't stop as he fell out of the building and started descending towards the street. Oh, shit. But his fall was cut short when he felt someone grab his ankle and fell back towards the building. He slammed against another window and suddenly felt his bandana start to come undone. As he grabbed it and held it to his head, he looked up to see who had grabbed him before he became a stain on the ground. Blake was hanging them from the window they had fallen from after wrapping her weapon around a sturdy anchor. Naruto blinked in surprise before he chuckled. He looked back up at the girl that saved him from falling and nodded. Thanks. Blake let a faint smile come to her face. No problem. Aren't I still heavy? No, you're back to normal. Blake looked out and spotted the building Wilkes went crashing into. I think his semblance deactivated when he lost consciousness. That's just how some people's abilities work. Oh, that's cool. Yes. Blake let them hang for a little bit before looking down. Maybe you should listen to Kiba's advice. A salad would probably help. Naruto's smile turned into a frown, and he just groaned. Can you just pull me up now? Blood's rushing to my head. Ruby collapsed on her knees and sighed in relief as a moment of peace came after the continuous fighting. She looked around, seeing the rest of her present friends start to relax and calm down. She spotted Sasuke walking over to them after he stepped aside so he could finish their plan. She wheezed. We're done now, right? For real this time? For real. I doubt he's getting back up quickly from that. He looked back at the hole Wilsk was sent flying through as Blake and Naruto climbed back up. He noted, pretty clever to use Naruto's weight to add force behind the punch. John fell on his back. His idea. Quick. Thinking. Ow. He held his chest as his lungs were burning. Yeah, he gets those every once in a while. He looked over at Yang and Kiba as they shook their arms out for relief. But lifting him must have felt like... Benching 1,000 pounds, Yang yelled indignantly as she slumped down on her butt and attempting to get feeling back in her arms. Really? No, but if he looked as much as he weighed, then he'd be too fat to get through a door, Kiba yelled as he sat down and waved his hands around. Oh man, when I get feeling back in my hands, I'm gonna punch that guy. Did you throw a death stalker? Yeah, but at least then I was going on adrenaline. Now I'm lucid and aware and everything aches and I'm tired and it sucks. Naruto and Blake finally joined back with the group as the blonde tied his slightly patchy bandana around his head again. He looked around. Guys, we gotta go now. The more exhausted members of the party groaned at his suggestion and John waved it off. Can we have like 10 minutes to sit down and rest? Don't we deserve it? You guys should rest, Blake said before she pointed out the window. But the police that are coming this way will probably have skirmishes for you if you do. Their eyes widened in shock as they immediately ignored their fatigue and jumped to their feet. Why are the police coming? Well, Wilkes didn't call the cops, but I guess one of the other buildings heard all the noise we were making and called them. Naruto said before pointing to the stairs. So we should probably split before we get asked why we raided a relief program and attacked an innocent man. They looked at Sasuke as he groaned and shook his head. Why said she heard him talking about his business and method, but she couldn't record it with a scroll. And we beat him, but this is just going to look like an assault. Nothing is going to change. Mr. Wilkes, sir. An injured guard came running to the door with his broken weapon. I'm ready for your next command. He silently stared at the 17s that stood in the remains of the destroyed and totalitarian room without any sign of his boss. He slowly turned around to run away. No, you don't. Yang grabbed him by the collar and knocked his feet off from under him. She looked over at the others and smirked. We just need to know where they're keeping their junk, right? No one seemed to argue as they opened the floor to Yang. She pulled the guy up and looked him square in the eyes with a toothy smile. Now, I've got some questions for you, and if you don't want to end up like your boss, getting thrown through a window with a punch that'll probably break a Nevermore, you'll answer them honestly, okay? The thug nervously nodded. Yes, ma'am. Please, I prefer sir. Hunting. Are you recording? Not yet. Give me a sec. Hurry up. They're gonna walk him through soon. Okay, ready. In 3, 2, 1. Hello, Lisa Lavender here, reporting live to bring you the breaking news from the Upper District in the city of Bell. Businesses all around the district were put to a halt this evening when they noticed commotion coming from the Bureau Relief Effort building. The authorities found Velton Wilkes, the millionaire and founder of the effort program for over 2 decades, beaten inside a neighboring building after a group of unknown assailants came wreaking havoc throughout the building. The officers assisted him and went searching through the building for clues of who might have attacked him, but found something else among the search. Officers found when they entered the building multiple doors and holes in the walls and floor marked with garish paintings and signs that said, "Look here," indicating for them to descend into the basement level and then further down into rooms and levels the buildings was not shown to have in its floor plans. There the officers found paperwork and ledgers detailing an intricate and vast movement of money and payments to more than just the workers at the program. But that was not all being peddled by this underground system. Stolen vehicles, illegal firearms, shipments of dust from the Schnee Dust Company that had been reported missing for months, as well as hired criminals and mercenaries posing as the guards and staff of the building. The ledgers are also rumored to indicate those that had purchased or done business with this underground network, containing names of some of the most infamous criminals across the kingdom. Whatever it There he is! Dozens of reporters and cameras started gathering together and flashing as police officers were leading Wilkes into a police van in handcuffs. The large man didn't look at the cameras as they caught pictures of him in his ragged suit and with a bloody broken nose. The news teams tried to question him, but they were deterred by police officers as Wilkes was put inside a van and driven off with an escort of cars guiding them. Lisa turned back to the camera. Velton Wilkes, a man believed to be a saint, was really a devil in disguise. The stolen merchandise is being apprehended by officials now, and the councils will be discussing what to do with this relief program from here on out. But some questions still remain. Who were the mysterious people that brought this treachery into the light, and where could they be right now? Hunting. Can I just wave at the camera and say hi? I want to see if Dad and Swy see it on TV. No means no. Weiss pulled her partner back around the corner where the rest of them were hiding or out from the cops and media. She placed her hands on her hips and reprimanded the younger girl. We already said that we weren't going to reveal we were here tonight. It's already uncertain whether we'll be caught if Wilkes confesses and reveals it was us that did this. And if he does, then the council is going to be very interested in why we attacked their charity. So popping out and saying hello at all the local paparazzi would be bad. Am I making myself clear? Ruby pouted off to the side. More like killing the fun. Unbelievable. Guys, can you please stop arguing? I have a headache. I'm pretty sure that's a concussion. All 12 of the Beacon students were tired, weary, bruised in some fashion, and had their clothes dirty. It was a lot of work to take down a massive criminal organization in just one night. Pyrrha sighed in relief before looking around at her friends. Well, despite the injuries and pain, even though there's a ton of it, we did succeed in what we set out to do tonight. Blake gently crossed her arms and nodded. We confronted Wilkes, defeated him, showed the cops where to look, crumbled his entire underground criminal network, and in the process revealed a dozen other big criminals across the kingdom that worked with him. She gave a small nod. I say that's a job well done. Woohoo! We rock! Nora cheered, somehow still brimming with energy despite everything that happened that evening. She looked around eagerly. Hey, what are we gonna do next Saturday? Infiltrate a military base? Camp out with the Grim? Oh, try and panty raid Professor Goodwitch? No one wanted to even approach the topic. You know what, guys? John got up to his feet with legs feeling like jelly and had to wheeze out. I love hanging out with you guys, but I think I'm gonna stay in next week. Can't go partying every night. Me too. Yeah, dude, I'm gonna sleep in every Saturday from here on out. We should probably head back to school, Tedden said as she dusted off her pants, not at all minding the fact that she was only wearing a shirt with no sleeves after having them burnt off. We don't want anyone knowing we weren't in our rooms this late. They might get suspicious. Good idea, Doctor said as he pushed off of the wall and started heading down while the others lifted themselves up. When I get home, I'm gonna sleep like a baby. Naruto, hold on. Naruto stopped when he heard Sasuke stop him and ran up to his side. The black-haired boy looked back at their friends before grabbing Naruto's shoulder and leaning them down so they could whisper in private. The others just stood by patiently as the boy talked. What? Naruto yelled as he shot back up and looked back at them with an embarrassed red hue on his face. He leaned back down to Sasuke. Yeah, I know, but they know. Well, I mean, they should know. We don't. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Naruto and Sasuke stood back up and faced their friends as Naruto seemed uncomfortable and tried to avoid their gaze. Sasuke was the first to speak. We want to say something to you all. We weren't certain we would be able to pull this off at all, let alone by ourselves. And even despite what we've done, you guys accepted that and agreed to help. He looked back up at the massive building a few streets over. None of what happened tonight would have been possible without your help. Yeah. That was really cool of you guys. Naruto almost muttered as he still couldn't face them with his face and ears turning light pink. You didn't have to do that, but it was nice that you did. I mean, you guys aren't jerks, so of course you... What I mean is, we want to say thank you, Sasuke said earnestly with a small nod and smile. Thank you for all of your help. Naruto panicked and gave a small nod as well. Yeah, thanks guys. And if you ever need help, just ask and we'll be there. The others stood there in surprise before they all smiled at the gratitude their two friends showed. Of course, Yang decided to ruin the moment and laughed at Naruto's embarrassment. What the hell, Naruto? You having a stroke or something? Naruto turned away and groaned. Shut up. I've never had to thank a big group helping before. Yang and Kiba both popped up on his sides and shook him. Come on, say it again. Say it again. Yeah, say it into the recorder so we can hear you correctly. You guys are seriously pushing it. Naruto grumbled before he felt another person step up behind him and pull on his sleeve. He sighed and turned around to instead see Ruby looking up at him with her big silver eyes. The hooded girl smiled. You're welcome. The three teams all came to a peaceful silence and started making their way back to Beacon. Yang decided to get one more joke out after their eventful days. So Wise, don't, huh? I said don't, Wise said sternly before she looked around at everyone and pointed at them. What happened earlier didn't happen. This entire evening didn't happen. We were not at a club. I did not wear something ridiculous like that silly outfit, and I did not sing. The witnesses will probably be arrested after what happened tonight. I burned the dress to ashes in the bathroom, and the thought will fade from your memories. There will be no proof of how I humiliated myself ever. She glared at all of them. Understood? Understood! They were all silent as Weiss's command still hung in the air. Weiss stepped back into place and huffed with her arms crossed before she kept walking. My bad angel, put the devil in me. Weiss froze in horror before looking at her companions and seeing they were all stifling their laughter. She nearly growled. Who? Ruby held up her scroll to show a video of the performance. I couldn't help it. You're so good at singing, Weiss. Give that to me. No. Ruby avoided Weiss's grab and started running away. I'll keep this video forever. Weiss chased after her. You insufferable little red. But you came along and my heart went pop. Why do you have a video too? Because Naruto sent us all a copy. Weiss turned and glared down her biggest nemesis as he froze under her intense glare. Naruto immediately got the hell out of the way as Weiss charged and started chasing him down the street. The bacon student started laughing at the sight of the stern Harris chasing after the blonde and her partner, and the tension of the uncertainty the day had caused them just started to disappear. Hunting. The two detectives started making their way into the back of the police station as they headed towards the special cells they had for the biggest criminals. Det Heyman looked at his partner and said with uncertainty, You you sure you want to you be doing this? The guy ain't said a single word since we brought him in. Yeah, but I still need to ask him. Chief's been on our butts all day about it. And that Burns said as they walked by the temporary cells of criminals that were awaiting trial or transportation to the large penitentiaries. They arrived at the last cell and knocked on the bars. Hey, you up? The bed creaked and Will sat up, now dressed in a blue jumpsuit since it was the only one his size they could provide. He had bandages around his bruised face after having his nose fixed, and he didn't seem enthused to see the two detectives waking him up. Hey man, crossed his arms. We've been moving out most of the contraband we found in the charity building, and holy cow, you could stockpile, man. It'll definitely take us a few more days to get the rest of that stuff moving. And now we got to work in tandem with the other forces across the kingdoms to get the info out about all the criminals you worked with. This was a lucky break, but man, do we got paperwork to do now? Burns said as he removed his sunglasses and rubbed his tired eyes. He put them back on and nodded. But now we're getting pressure about who to stick you with. The Legion Army wants you so they can question where you got all their equipment, while the big guy at the SDC is demanding you get life without chance of parole. But he's most interested in one thing in particular. Wilkes was silent as he didn't even bother looking the men in the eyes. Burns faced the wall. That wasn't all the dust that's been missing lately, Wilkes. Where'd you put the rest? Wilkes turned to the men and they leaned forward eagerly to hear what he had to say. I said only come when my lawyer shows up. Burns hung his head and sighed as his partner shook his head. Told you he wasn't gonna say anything. Yeah, you were right. Come on, let's get a drink. Pretty sure we could both use a little time away from the desk. Sounds good. You buying? How about we just flip a coin? The detectives walked away from the cell, and Wilkes sat back in deep thought. It didn't matter who wanted him most right now. He wasn't going to make it to them. With all the people he worked with now in the crosshairs of the police across the kingdoms, someone was going to try and take him out first, even if he did survive and get out of here, and that was big if. His business life was over now. The SDC was probably severing all ties to him to save themselves, and his assets were most likely going to be frozen. Once he got out, he had a lot of work to do. But first, when he got out, he was going to capture and kill each and every one of those brats, especially Sasuke and Naruto. He told them what was going to happen if they ever crossed him, and when they started, and he was a man of his word. Oh, one of the detectives said after someone ran into him. The inmates all laughed and jerked at the sight of the folly. Oh, sorry, sir. A female voice quickly apologized. Well, watch where you're going. None of these guys need any more entertainment. Freaking rookies. I know, right? It won't happen again, I promise. The female officer slowly backed away into the Wilkes site, making sure to appear embarrassed and humbled by the accident. But the moment the doors closed, she stood up straight, and a small smirk came over her face. The dark-skinned woman turned to his cell and pulled out the keys that she had swept from the detectives. She quickly opened the lock and slid the door open as Wilkes stayed firmly seated. The girl stood there silently before a small smile came over her face. She took off her badge and held it out in front of before snapping it in two, revealing it was just plastic. Wilkes actually sat up with intrigue as the girl placed both pieces on the bars and walked out of sight. The large man slowly approached the bars and looked at both sides, hearing the inmates yell for freedom as well as no cops came running. He looked up and saw the camera was unplugged and nothing that was happening was being viewed at the moment. He looked down the side of the hall and saw the police boots she was wearing lying in the way. He followed them, making sure not to draw too much attention before the police came back to see what was going on. This was strange. All of his associates had men in prison to take care of stitches or people that might be a problem. Some could even bribe cops to try and kill him in his cell. But this one was leading him somewhere. He looked over to see the boots she had taken were lying in the hallway as he led. He hurried down the hallway and went down the corner. He noticed the pants and jacket the fake officer was wearing were lying by the back exit. He followed the trail and came out into an empty alley behind the police station. He looked down and noticed her police cap lying on the ground. He looked around and tried to find anything that could give him a sign about what happened next. And his thoughts were answered as a white van with tinted windows swerved around the corner. It sped up considerably before stopping a few feet away from him. He waited silently before the back door swung open and a playful voice called out, Welcome, Mr. Wilkes, to your personal carrier service for the evening. The man that popped out of the back was a tall gentleman with bright orange hair and a long bang that covered his right eye. He had a stylish white suit and black pants with boots. In one hand he had a cane, and with the other he playfully tipped his bowler hat before speaking with a mirth. "Sorry about the accommodations, but you would not believe how hard it is to find proper transportation for a guy your size. Now, come on in." The man sighed and sat back in the van before pointing at the police station. "We have about 30 seconds before they realize you're gone and everything goes hell so." Wilkes looked back at the station before running into the van and sitting across from the other man. They closed the doors and the van quickly sped off into the street. The orange-haired man leaned back in his seat and chuckled wholeheartedly at their escape. He sighed. "Oh, when you get into the big leagues, you forget how much fun the little things are. Running from the cops, stealing wallets and purses, vandalism. It just..." He seemed giddy at the adrenaline and joy running through his body. "So much fun! But once you go big, I guess you still do some of the same stuff, just bigger, and with more explosions." He looked at the two people sitting in the front seats. "This must be why you two are always out playing kitty, am I right?" The two people in the front seat just ignored him or let out a tiny grumble in return. The man waved off their annoyance. "Ignore the two gadlings. They just haven't hit their strides yet." He noticed the steely look Wilkes leveled at him and laughed. "Sorry, where are my manners? Hi, I'm Roman Torchwick." The professional criminal smiled and leaned back in his seat with a smug smile. "You know about me? Well, I'm flattered." "Of course I know about you. You're the man that's been stealing dust in my territory," Wilkes said as he leaned forward. "Plus, it's not hard to forget a face when you have it hung over every inch of the media with a target on your back and a price on your head." Pfft. Roman looked at the front seat and glared at the girl that giggled at his expense. He turned back to the large man and smirked. "Well, my head isn't the one filling all the little news stations now, am I right?" Wilkes narrowed his eyes as Roman leaned forward as well. "But bit of an unfortunate luck of the draw with that one, am I right?" Wilkes kept staring. "Just proves that you should always make sure you and former employees can leave things off on the same terms." "Oh, that's what happened," Roman said as he nodded his head. "I was wondering who it was that came crashing down the business. What was it then? Disgruntled work staff didn't get the overtime they deserved? You have to wonder how bad their dental had to be if they risked breaking into a government-owned building to attack you. It was just two rather ungrateful boys I had supplied with purpose in their useless lives, and they repay me by destroying my life and livelihood. Of course, not by themselves, mind you. They had help from that warrior girl, a Schnee daughter, a bathroom attendant, and a little girl in a red hood." Roman's mouth seemed to dip at the mention of a hooded girl in red. He waved his hand around aimlessly. "This girl in the hood, yay-high, annoying, carries around an obnoxiously big razor blade on a stick." Wilkes raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" "Just surprised how much she gets around." Rowan shrugged before sitting back in his seat. So now that your life's work has essentially been flushed down the toilet, any plans? Because it would be a shame if all your talents and experience in being a baddie just went down the drain like that." Wilkes raised his brow in a skeptical fashion. "And what might you be suggesting exactly?" Roman smiled and started reaching into his pocket. "Well, recently I've been getting into businesses with some rather colorful and interesting characters. We have plans, big plans, mind you, that could very well shake a lot of things up. Unfortunately, the lovely lady I am currently in cahoots with, while being the apple of my eye, is also a bit of a taskmaster. Do this, do that, faster, better. It can be quite exhausting, actually." He motioned to the two in the front. "Plus, she likes to stick me with little Miss Annoying and big baby pain in my ass over here to make sure I get it done. No trust. How can that be good for relationships?" Wilkes noticed the obvious bit of anger and disgust in the woman's throat as her companion continued to drive the car. "And after seeing what you've been able to do without notice for the last 20 years, how can I ignore when a light bulb goes off over my head like that?" He pulled the cigar and placed it in his mouth. He lit the cigar before continuing. "I started thinking, how about if you joined us? You obviously have the talent and resources for collecting this stuff and moving it without notice. You won't have a charity to hide it behind anymore, but I'm certain our little group will be more than helpful in finding another effective way to move it. You won't be sorry." He held out a hand. "Interested?" Wilkes stayed silent for a moment before looking down at the offered hand. He looked back up at Torchwick and gave a small smile as he sat back. "You're an imbecile," Roman's smile fell. What? Do you understand how I've been able to control the underworld like this for so long? Anonymity, loyalty, and diversion, fear, control. And these are the things you need to have if you ever wish to actually control a world like this. You flaunt around like a fool, revealing your existence and relishing the fact that your face is plastered everywhere. You have no intimidation, no force behind you that can bend a man to your will. You are nothing but a pretty boy that wants to play bad, and I will never work with a man like you, Roman. Roman kept a firm glare on Wilkes as the large man did not waver with what he said. Roman looked down at his cigar before cracking a smile. I should be mad, but I'm so flattered by the pretty boy compliment that I don't know what to say. He took a long huff of his cigar before noting, but my partner, the pretty one I mentioned earlier, she was very clear. Get this man to work with us or eliminate the competition. Will scoffed challengingly. I dare you to try and make a move. Me? Roman faked surprise as he touched his own chest. No. I'm a businessman, good sir. I could never get my hands dirty with such tasks like that. The van came to a sudden stop, and Roman popped out the back before giving a cheeky smile. That's why I brought them along. He shut the door behind him, and Wilkes turned to look at the duo getting out of the front seats. The driver was a young man wearing a slim black and silver battle suit with dark gray hair. The girl riding shotgun was the same one that led him out of the police custody, wearing a revealing tank top and short shorts with bright green hair. The two youngsters gave creepy smiles before they moved towards the back of the van. Roman silently stood outside of the van and looked around at the empty lot of the industrial district. He sucked on his cigar. Slam, blam, crash, bang, shrip, and crash, slam. The door sprung open and Wilkes came flying out the back after the van shook around like crazy. Roman released the smoke in his lungs and shook his head. See, why do something messy yourself when you can get to help to do it? Shut up, you moron! The girl with green hair threatened as she glared Torchwick down. And what was with all those partner and pretty lady comments earlier? Cinder would never be caught dead touching you, creep. Whatever. Romain waved off her insult, getting accustomed to their constant bickering. He motioned to the beaten old man. What happened? Weren't you supposed to make it faster? It seems like you are hot talk. Emerald glared. Shut up. He was harder than we thought he was, and we mean in the literal sense. He was harder? Yeah, the boy said as he sat on the floor of the van and rubbed his feet. It was like kicking an iron wall. I think I sprained my ankle. You two gonna keep whining all night, or can we get moving? I had to record my favorite show to come to do this crap, and I want to get back to it quickly. Emerald shook her head. He's right, You'll never be a crime lord being as pathetic as you are. Sure, I'll take advice from the street rat just as soon as I take financial advice from the plumber. Roman groaned before he started walking over to the defeated old man. Just get ready to go when I say. We'll go when we feel like it. Yep, the boy tapped Emerald's knee as he crawled back to the front. You're driving now, by the way. What? She asked increasingly. Why? Well, 1. Sprained ankle, and 2, because I said and I'm already in the shotgun seat. Ugh, she shook her head before moving into the front. Mercury, you are such an unbelievable pain in the... Roman walked over to Will's body as the older man's head was severely bleeding, creating a pool of blood below his skull. Roman finished his cigar and tossed it aside. I bet you really would have liked working with us. Enjoyed getting a little fun in your last days, old man. Oh well, you live and you... Oops. I guess that saying doesn't get to apply to you anymore. Will squeezed and reached out to the menacing ginger standing over him. By the way, Roman stepped away from his hand before he could grab him and smirked. It's Mr. Torchwick to you. Bye-bye. Wilkes watched as Roman jumped back in the van and they drove off in a hurry, leaving him bleeding out in the abandoned lot of the industrial district. The old kingpin reached out and tried to crawl away before he lost feeling in his arms and just rested his head. The old crime lord lay silent, bleeding in silhouette as the sound of off-far car horns was the last thing that reached his ears. The old king was dead, and the new kings were rising. End of chapter 20.